My name is Tessa, and I was on the brink of what I thought would be a liberating moment, hitting send on my resignation letter. But before I could embrace the thrill of breaking free from a job that had become a cage, something unexpected happened. I discovered a truth that shook the very foundation of my reality, a truth that revealed who was really sabotaging me. And it wasn't a coworker as I had initially suspected. If you've ever felt the gnawing sensation that someone was working against you, then you might just relate to my story. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know below. To understand how I got here, let me take you back a few months. I had been working at a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Chicago for nearly 3 years. It was a role I had once loved, a place where my creativity could flourish. I had dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, of being recognized for my ideas and hard work. But slowly, the vibrant atmosphere of collaboration turned into a competitive battlefield, where trust was a rare commodity. My colleagues, who once felt like friends, began to feel like competitors. Each meeting became a silent war of who could present better, who could outshine the other. And for me, it felt like I was losing ground. Every time I pitched an idea, there was this shadow in the room, a whisper of doubt that didn't belong to me. I remember one meeting in particular, where I presented a campaign that I had poured my heart into. I could see the flicker of excitement in my boss's eyes. But then, a colleague named Miranda spoke up. She had been with the firm for a long time and had a knack for twisting words. Tessa's idea seems great, but have we considered the budget implications? It was as if she had rehearsed it. The room shifted, and suddenly, my idea was no longer a beacon of innovation, but a potential financial disaster. After that, I started noticing small things, subtle changes that made my workplace feel increasingly hostile. Emails I sent would go unanswered, while others received immediate feedback. My contributions in team discussions were often dismissed or redirected. I began to wonder if I was imagining it all. Was I just being paranoid? Or was there something more insidious at play? It didn't help that I was the newest member of our team, which made me feel like an outsider, a target. I remember sitting at my desk, scrolling through my phone, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But deep down, I could feel it, a gnawing sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake off. I decided it was time to take charge of my narrative. I started documenting every interaction, every comment that felt off. I needed proof. I was determined to find out who was undermining me. I thought it was just the usual office politics. But as days turned into weeks, I started feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. It was exhausting, trying to decipher motives and intentions. I often found myself staring into the mirror, asking, "What am I doing wrong?" But there was one moment that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I received an unexpected call from an old friend, Jenna. She had been my confidant through college and knew all my career aspirations. As I shared my frustrations and the feeling of being cornered at work, she said something that struck me. "Tessa, sometimes the enemy is closer than you think." Her words echoed in my mind long after we hung up. What did she mean? That night, I tossed and turned, replaying our conversation. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna was hinting at something deeper. I began to reflect on my relationships at work, focusing on the people I had initially trusted. The more I thought about it, the more my gut told me to look closer. It wasn't Miranda alone. I had noticed a few other colleagues subtly aligning with her, almost like they were conspiring together. The idea that there was a group working against me sent chills down my spine. I decided to gather more evidence. I started observing their interactions, noting how they would huddle together in whispered conversations when they thought I wasn't looking. Their laughter felt different now, almost mocking. I even caught a few sideways glances directed at me, filled with an unspoken language I couldn't quite decode. I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together clues that led to an unsettling conclusion. As I delved deeper, I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about the culture of fear and competition that had seeped into the very foundation of our team. I could either continue to play their game or expose the truth. I wanted to confront the situation head-on, but I also feared the repercussions. Could I really face them? And what would happen if I was wrong? The turmoil inside me was intense, but I knew I couldn't back down. I had to find out who was really pulling the strings and why. With every passing day, The weight of my decision to resign grew heavier. I was torn between wanting to escape this toxic environment and feeling the need to stand my ground. I began drafting my resignation letter, pouring my heart into every word. But as I typed, I couldn't help but wonder if I was giving up too soon. What if there was a chance to make things right? What if I could turn the tables and reclaim my space? As I sat there, staring at the screen, I knew one thing for certain. Before I posted my resignation, I needed to uncover the truth. There was something lurking beneath the surface, and I was determined to bring it into the light. This was no longer just about a job. It was about respect, integrity, and reclaiming my narrative. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, ready for whatever came next. So, here I am, standing at the crossroads of my career, with my finger hovering over the send button. The question lingers. What will happen when I finally uncover who was really sabotaging me? And will I be ready for the fallout? Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. I took a deep breath and pushed away from my desk, the chair squeaking slightly as I did. I needed to clear my head, and what better way than to take a walk? My office was on the 4th floor, and I headed down the stairs, feeling the weight of my decision with every step. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, but outside the world was vibrant and alive. I stepped into the crisp air, the sun shining down and illuminating everything in a golden hue. I felt a pang of nostalgia for the days when a simple walk could clear my mind, when the fresh breeze didn't feel so heavy with uncertainty. I found a bench near a small park and sat down, letting the sounds of the city wash over me. The laughter of children, the hum of passing cars, the distant bark of a dog, all comforting reminders that life was still moving forward, even when mine felt stalled. As I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had felt it for a while, like an itch I couldn't scratch. There were whispers and subtle glances, and I couldn't help but feel like someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. I thought back to the meetings where my ideas were dismissed, or the time my project was sabotaged just before the presentation. It made no sense to me then, but now, with the perspective of the moment, I felt a fire ignite within me. Determined to find answers, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. I needed someone I could trust, someone who had been close enough to see the dynamics at play. Lisa, my best friend from college, came to mind. She had always been there for me, through thick and thin, and I knew she wouldn't sugarcoat the truth. I hit dial, and after a few rings, she picked up. "Hey, long time no chat. How's work treating you?" she asked, her voice warm and welcoming. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to unfold the chaos swirling in my life. Not great, actually. "Can I vent for a minute?" "Of course. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, letting the words flow freely. I shared my frustrations about my job, the toxic environment, the feeling of being undermined. I told her about the resignation letter I had drafted and how I was feeling torn between staying and leaving. "Wow, that sounds tough. But it seems like you're not just dealing with typical workplace drama. Have you thought about who could be behind it?" That question hung in the air. I hadn't put much thought into it until now. I don't know, honestly. I've felt like someone's been sabotaging me for a while. I just can't figure out who. Have you considered that it might not be a coworker? Sometimes the people closest to you can create the most chaos without you even knowing it. Her words struck me like a lightning bolt. I had been so focused on the office dynamics that I hadn't thought about the people outside of it. My mind raced as I considered who in my personal life could have a stake in my unhappiness. After we hung up, I felt a strange mix of clarity and confusion. I had a hunch that I needed to dig deeper into my relationships. I spent the next few days observing my coworkers, my friends, and even family members with a more scrutinizing eye. It was as though a veil had lifted, and I began to see things that I had previously brushed off as innocent quirks or misunderstandings. At work, I started taking notes of interactions. I watched how certain colleagues spoke to me differently in front of others, how they would laugh off my ideas in meetings but compliment them privately. Was this a tactic to undermine my confidence? It was a slow burn, realizing that perhaps I had been the target of a calculated scheme. Then there was Sarah, my closest friend at work. We had shared countless lunches together, confiding in each other about our dreams, struggles, and the workplace drama. But I noticed a shift in her demeanor lately. She had become more distant, her responses to my questions curt and uninviting. One afternoon, I decided to confront her. "Hey, is everything okay? You've seemed a bit off lately." She looked taken aback, as if my question had caught her off guard. "I'm fine. Just a bit busy, you know how it is." But it was the way she avoided eye contact that made my heart sink. I had seen her speak with some of my more aggressive coworkers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something brewing beneath the surface. That weekend, I decided to invite her over for coffee. I figured a more relaxed setting might help her open up. As we sat on my couch, sipping our drinks, the tension hung thick in the air. "Listen, I feel like something's going on between us. I've noticed you've been a bit different," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "I guess I've just been feeling overwhelmed. Work's been a lot lately. Is there something else? You can talk to me." That's when she finally broke. "I don't want to get involved, but I've heard things. There are whispers about you, things that are not true. It's creating a rift." My heart raced. "What kind of things?" But she wouldn't say. She seemed scared, as if speaking any further would put her in danger. The conversation ended there, but my mind was racing. Could it really be that someone had been spreading lies about me? And if so, why? I spent the following days piecing together my discoveries, but instead of clarity, I found myself in a fog of confusion. The truth seemed to slip further away, but one thing was certain. I needed to confront this head-on. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I was no longer just drafting a resignation letter. I was on a mission to uncover the truth, and I wasn't going to let anyone keep me in the dark. I remember that night vividly, the kind of night where the weight of uncertainty hangs heavy in the air. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every interaction at work. Who could it be? Who was behind this smear campaign? The questions swirled in my mind like a hurricane, and sleep eluded me. I felt like a detective in my own life, desperate for answers but without a single clue to follow. The next morning, I woke up with a determined spirit. I decided to take action. I began my day by brewing a strong cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling my small apartment as I prepared to face whatever lay ahead. My heart raced with anticipation as I made a mental list of everyone I needed to talk to. I had to gather information, to connect the dots. First on my list was Jenna, the friend who had first hinted at the whispers. I needed her to open up. I needed her to be brave enough to share what she had heard. I reached out to her, suggesting we meet at our favorite cafe after work. It was a cozy spot, filled with the buzz of conversation and the comforting scent of baked goods. I hoped that a familiar environment would put her at ease. When I arrived, I found her already seated, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I've been thinking about our last conversation. I don't want to get you in trouble. Jenna, I need to know what's happening." "I can't let this go on," I urged, trying to convey the urgency of the situation. She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the cafe as if she feared someone was eavesdropping. "Okay, but promise you won't say it was me." "I promise." With that, she shared what she had heard. Whispers of discontent, rumors about my work ethic and dedication. The most painful part? Someone had claimed I was looking for a new job while still being uncommitted to the current one. Each word was like a dagger, twisting in my heart. "I don't understand why anyone would do this," I said, shaking my head. "Have I upset someone without realizing it?" Jenna shrugged, looking conflicted. "I think it's just office politics. You know how it is. Some people thrive on drama." It felt like a betrayal, and I could feel the fire in my stomach rising. I knew I had to confront the source of these rumors, but I also needed to keep my options open. If I was going to quit, I wanted it to be on my terms, not because of the lies that were being spread about me. As the day turned into night, I found myself grappling with a mix of emotions. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but so did a sense of sadness. I had invested so much time and energy into this job, and now it felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. I made a point to approach my work with renewed vigor. If I was going to confront this, I had to be at my best. I wouldn't give my detractors the satisfaction of seeing me falter. The following week, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of confronting anyone directly, I started observing. I watched how people interacted, paying attention to who seemed to avoid me and who lingered a little too long around the water cooler. I noticed the subtle glances exchanged between coworkers, the hushed conversations that would stop when I entered the room. It was like being part of a twisted game I had never signed up for. One afternoon, as I was leaving the break room, I overheard two colleagues whispering. I could catch snippets of their conversation, and my heart sank when I realized they were talking about me. I stepped back, pretending to look at my phone, straining to listen. "She thinks she's so important," one of them said. "It's only a matter of time before everyone realizes she's not cut out for this." Those words ignited a fire within me. I was done being the subject of their gossip. I needed to confront this head-on, but I had to be strategic. I couldn't let anger cloud my judgment. I had to be smart about how I approached this. The next day, I found myself sitting across from my boss, Sarah. I had scheduled a meeting under the guise of discussing my recent performance. My goal was to get her thoughts on my contributions, all while gauging her reaction to my inquiries about the office dynamics. "I really value your feedback," I started, keeping my tone professional. Sarah gave me the usual praise, but I could see the flicker of something else in her eyes. "You've been doing well, but I've noticed some tension within the team," she said cautiously. "Really? I hadn't noticed," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Do you think it could be because of the upcoming project deadlines?" She paused, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "It might be a mix of things. You know how stress can bring out the worst in people." That was my cue. I leaned in, my curiosity piqued. "Do you think there's something I should be aware of? Something I should change?" Her response was evasive, and I could see the tightness in her jaw. It confirmed my suspicions. She was aware of the office gossip, but she wasn't willing to address it directly. I left the meeting feeling more determined than ever to uncover the truth. I spent the next few days strategizing. I began documenting my interactions, keeping track of any odd behavior. It felt like I was building a case against a shadowy figure lurking in the office, someone who seemed to thrive on undermining me. I knew I was getting closer to the truth, but I still didn't have a solid lead. As I walked through the office, I felt the weight of eyes on me. I was determined to find out who was truly behind the sabotage. I just needed one more piece of the puzzle to set everything in motion, and I was prepared to dig deeper than ever before. Each day felt like an endless loop of whispers and sidelong glances. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and every time I entered the break room or passed by a cluster of coworkers, I could almost hear the hushed conversations stop abruptly. I knew they were talking about me, but the more I tried to dismiss it, the more it consumed my thoughts. I began to notice small things, a misplaced file, an email that never reached me, a meeting I was left out of. It felt as if someone was orchestrating a symphony of sabotage, and I was the sole performer without a score. One afternoon, I decided to take my investigation to the next level. I had been working late to avoid the crowds, and the office was quiet. I made my way to the filing cabinets, pretending to organize some documents, but my real intent was to listen. I knew some of my colleagues often met in a conference room just down the hall to discuss projects and share insights. I positioned myself strategically near the door, straining to catch snippets of their conversations. What I overheard made my heart race. "Can you believe she thinks she deserves the promotion?" one voice said, dripping with scorn. I recognized it instantly. Megan. We had once shared a friendly lunch, but ever since I had been put up for that promotion, her demeanor towards me had soured. "I mean, who does she think she is?" Another voice chimed in. "She's barely been here a year." My stomach churned as I realized the depth of their disdain. It felt like betrayal. But more than that, it fueled my resolve. I couldn't let them undermine my hard work and dedication without a fight. I returned to my desk, my mind racing with thoughts. I needed to confront the situation head-on. But how? The next day, I decided to take a more proactive approach. I organized a team meeting where we could discuss our current projects and share any updates. I wanted to create a space for open dialogue, but deep down, I also hoped to gauge the atmosphere, perhaps draw out the negativity that had been brewing. As everyone trickled into the conference room, I could feel the tension. I took a deep breath and began. Thanks for being here, everyone. I wanted to gather us to share our progress and any challenges we're facing, I said, trying to keep my tone light. I opened the floor for discussion, and as the conversation flowed, I noticed Megan shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She was avoiding eye contact, and I could feel the tension radiating off her. As the meeting progressed, I could sense the undercurrents of animosity. Every time I presented an idea or shared a success, I could feel their judgment. I decided to address it directly. It seems like there's some frustration in the room, I said, my voice steady but firm. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. If there's something bothering you, let's talk about it. A few awkward moments passed, and then Megan spoke up. I just think we need to be realistic about our goals. Not everything is achievable, and sometimes it feels like one person's ambitions can overshadow the team's efforts. The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of her accusation hanging in the air, like a heavy fog. I took a deep breath, refusing to let her words get the better of me. I appreciate your perspective, Megan, I replied, keeping my tone calm. But I believe we should support each other's ambitions. We're all here to contribute to our success. The meeting dissolved into a mix of defensive comments and forced laughter, but I felt a small victory in standing my ground. I knew I had to keep pushing, but I also realized I needed more than just words. I needed evidence. Over the next few weeks, I intensified my efforts to document everything. I started recording meetings, taking notes on conversations, and tracking the timeline of events. I even reached out to a few trusted colleagues, subtly probing for their insights. I wanted to know if anyone else had noticed the changes in the office dynamics. Each piece of information felt like a breadcrumb leading me closer to the truth. One evening, while sifting through my notes, I came across something that made my heart skip a beat. An email thread that I had copied from a shared drive, discussing team strategies, showed some concerning shifts. There were comments about keeping tabs on certain individuals, and my name appeared more than once. I felt a cold wave wash over me as I realized that the tabs they were keeping were not for constructive reasons. It became clear to me that this wasn't just about petty jealousy. It was a calculated effort to undermine my position. I had stumbled onto a web of manipulation that reached deeper than I had ever imagined. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and I knew I had to confront this head-on. But how? I needed to gather more evidence before making any accusations. I had to be strategic in my approach, and that meant playing the long game. I decided to bide my time, keeping my head down while I continued gathering information. The more I discovered, the more it fueled my determination to expose the truth. I could feel the tide shifting, and I was ready to take my power back. With each passing day, I grew more resolute. I wasn't just going to stand by while my hard work was being dismantled by whispers and hidden agendas. I was ready to fight back. And soon, everyone would know the truth. The real challenge lay ahead, and I was prepared to face whatever came my way. As I navigated the office in those weeks that followed, I became a keen observer, a silent detective in my own life. Every seemingly innocent conversation became a potential lead. I started taking notes during meetings, not just on the topics discussed, but on the body language of my colleagues, their interactions with each other, and especially their reactions to me. I found myself replaying moments in my head, dissecting them like a scene from a crime drama. Had that glance really been just a glance, or was there more to it? The office culture had taken on a different tone for me. What had once felt like camaraderie now resonated with an undercurrent of tension. I could sense the shift, and I began to question everyone's motives, including those I had considered friends. The realization that I couldn't trust anyone was unsettling. I felt like a character in a thriller, constantly looking over my shoulder, always on guard. During lunch breaks, I began observing my coworkers more closely. It was during one of these breaks that I overheard a conversation that sent chills down my spine. I was sitting at a secluded corner table, pretending to scroll through my phone when I noticed Jenna and Mark, two colleagues I'd previously thought were allies, engaged in a hushed discussion. Their voices were low, but I could make out enough to understand that they were talking about me. "Did you see how she presented that proposal?" Jenna scoffed. "It's like she's trying to steal the spotlight." "Yeah." And I heard she's been getting some special treatment from the boss, Mark replied. We need to put her in her place before she gets too confident. My stomach twisted in knots. They weren't just whispering, they were plotting. I felt the walls closing in, and I fought the urge to confront them right then and there. But I knew I had to keep my cool. I had to play this smart. I stayed quiet, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. That evening, I returned home feeling more determined than ever. I couldn't just sit back and let them try to undermine my hard work. I had to turn the tide in my favor. I began to think of ways to gather more evidence of their behavior. I started documenting every conversation and incident that felt off. I even set up a secret folder on my computer where I kept screenshots of emails and messages that hinted at their tactics. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere in the office grew more charged. I could feel the tension building, and it wasn't just coming from my coworkers. It was radiating from me as well. I was constantly on edge, trying to balance my professional facade while inside, I was a storm of emotions. Then came the day of the quarterly team meeting. I had been preparing for it for weeks, meticulously refining my presentation, ensuring I would knock it out of the park. I knew this was my chance to showcase my value to the company, to remind everyone of what I brought to the table. But I also knew it was going to be a battleground, with Jenna and Mark likely waiting to pounce on any mistake I made. As I stood in front of my colleagues, I took a deep breath, letting the calm wash over me. I could feel the eyes on me, some supportive, others scrutinizing. I launched into my presentation, focusing on the data and insights I had gathered. I poured my heart into it, and for a moment, I felt invincible. But midway through, I noticed Jenna whispering something to Mark, who was smirking in response. My pulse quickened, but I steeled myself. I had to stay focused. I finished my presentation with a confident close, and as I stepped down, I felt a mix of relief and dread. As the meeting continued, I listened intently to the feedback. Mark and Jenna took their turns to present afterward, and I braced myself for the inevitable criticism. Sure enough, when Mark started his slide deck, he took shots at my work. It's great that she's trying, but I think we all know the data needs a bit more work, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Jenna chimed in, yes, but it's important that we keep our expectations in check. We wouldn't want to set ourselves up for disappointment, right? It was all so predictable, and I could feel the anger boiling inside me. I wanted to lash out, to defend myself right then and there, but I held back, reminding myself of my plan. I needed to gather more evidence before confronting them publicly. After the meeting, I overheard them laughing in the hallway, their voices filled with triumph. I felt sick. This wasn't just about office politics anymore. It was personal. I had become a target, and I needed to find a way to flip the script. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with thoughts of how to expose Jenna and Mark without jeopardizing my own position. I started crafting a strategy, one that involved not just confronting them, but also bringing the issue to the attention of our boss in a way that would leave no room for doubt. I spent days refining my plan, gathering all the evidence I had collected, and preparing my pitch for the boss. I wanted to ensure that when I presented my case, it would be ironclad. I would show the patterns of behavior, the underhanded tactics, and how they were impacting team morale. I was ready to take the plunge, and as the days went by, I could feel the tension in the air thickening around me. I was standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into a battle I never wanted, but one that I knew I had to win. As I stood at that metaphorical cliff, my heart raced with a mix of anticipation and dread. I had always prided myself on being a team player, someone who could navigate the waters of office dynamics with grace. But now, it felt like I was gearing up for war. The days blurred into nights, filled with sleepless thoughts and relentless planning. I had my notes neatly organized, my evidence compiled, and a strategy that I hoped would not only expose Jenna and Mark, but also reinforce my credibility. I knew I had to tread carefully. One wrong move could cost me everything. The day of the meeting with my boss finally arrived. I could feel the weight of my resolve pressing down on my shoulders as I walked into his office. It was a spacious room, filled with light and lined with shelves of books. The air was thick with the scent of coffee, and as I took a seat, I could sense the gravity of what I was about to do. I took a deep breath and began to lay out my case, speaking clearly and confidently. "Thank you for meeting with me," I started, locking eyes with him. "I want to discuss some concerns I have about our team dynamics, specifically regarding Jenna and Mark." As I unfolded my notes, I felt like I was unveiling a masterpiece. Each point I made was carefully crafted, supported by examples and instances that painted a clear picture of their behavior. I could see my boss's expression shift from curiosity to concern as I detailed the hostile atmosphere that had been brewing in our office. However, as I spoke, I also noticed the tension in my own voice. Was I coming off as too aggressive? Would he think I was just whining? I had to stay focused. I paused for a moment and asked him, "Have you noticed any changes in the team's morale lately?" I wanted to engage him, to make him see that this wasn't just my issue. It was affecting all of us. His brows furrowed, and I could tell he was contemplating my words. After I finished presenting my case, there was a moment of silence that felt like an eternity. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. "I appreciate your courage in bringing this to my attention," he finally said. "It's not easy to speak up about these things." My heart lifted a little at his acknowledgement, but I knew I wasn't out of the woods yet. We spent the next few minutes discussing possible solutions. He suggested a team meeting to address these issues head-on, which made my stomach churn. How would Jenna and Mark react to being called out in front of everyone? Would they double down on their tactics? But I knew that this was a crucial step toward addressing the toxicity that had seeped into our workplace. I nodded, trying to maintain my composure. As I left his office, a mixture of relief and anxiety washed over me. I had done it. I had taken a stand. But what would happen next? I walked back to my desk, each step feeling heavier than the last. The atmosphere in the office was palpably different, with whispers that seemed to echo off the walls, glances that felt like daggers. I had exposed myself, and now I felt vulnerable. Days turned into a blur as the team meeting approached. I could sense the tension building among my coworkers. The anticipation was thick in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna and Mark were plotting their retaliation. Each time they passed my desk, I braced myself for an attack, but all they offered were forced smiles and empty pleasantries. The day of the meeting arrived, and as we gathered in the conference room, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I chose a seat close to the front, wanting to be ready to speak if needed. My boss opened the meeting, addressing the team about the importance of communication and respect in the workplace. I felt a surge of anxiety, wondering if this would be a turning point or a disaster waiting to happen. When he finally brought up the issues I had raised, I watched as Jenna's face turned crimson. Mark attempted to downplay the situation, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. But my boss stood firm. "These concerns are valid, and it's essential for us to address them to foster a positive work environment," he stated, his voice steady. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and spoke up. "I appreciate that we're having this conversation. I think it's important to acknowledge that our interactions have significant effects on our productivity and overall morale. It's not just about personalities. It's about how we work together as a team." I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, some nodding in agreement, while others looked uneasy. Suddenly, Jenna chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, what are you saying? That we're supposed to all hold hands and sing Kumbaya?" The tension in the room escalated as people shifted in their seats, unsure of how to react. I could feel my heart racing, but I knew I couldn't back down now. "That's not what I'm saying at all," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "I'm suggesting that we find a way to communicate more effectively. Can we agree that we all want to succeed, and that starts with respecting one another?" The meeting continued, and I felt a mix of frustration and hope. As we discussed strategies to improve our work culture, I noticed some of my coworkers speaking up, sharing their experiences, which was a good sign. It was as if my bravery had sparked something in them. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna and Mark were still simmering beneath the surface, plotting their next move. As the meeting wrapped up, I left feeling a strange blend of satisfaction and anxiety. I had taken a stand, but would it be enough? How far was Jenna willing to go to protect her position? I couldn't shake the thought as I made my way back to my desk. I turned back to my coworkers, who were buzzing with discussion. "What do you think? Was it the right approach?" I found myself asking. I needed their support, their validation. Their responses ranged from optimistic to cautious, reflecting the uncertainty that hung in the air. The battle wasn't over yet, but I was determined to see it through. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know below. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. I arrived at the office each morning with a mix of determination and dread. I wanted to believe that my efforts had made a difference, that my courage would inspire a shift in our workplace culture. But as I walked through the familiar halls, I could still feel the weight of Jenna's and Mark's lingering presence, like shadows following me wherever I went. It wasn't just about them. It was about how their actions affected everyone around us, including me. I threw myself into my work, hoping to drown out the noise of my anxieties. Every email I sent, every project I tackled, became an exercise in reclaiming my confidence. I started to notice the small victories, the smiles from colleagues who were beginning to feel more comfortable speaking up, the collaborative energy that sparked in team meetings. My heart swelled with pride. It was as if the very air in the office had shifted, and I had helped to change it. But then came the whispers. I overheard snippets of conversations that made my stomach knot. "Did you hear what Jenna said?" One coworker whispered to another. "I can't believe she's trying to turn everyone against her." I felt my blood run cold. My mind raced back to our last meeting. Had I really stirred up that much animosity? Or was this simply a ploy to undermine my progress? One afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, typing away, when Jenna walked by. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her energy radiating like a storm cloud. It was unsettling. I had thought that by standing up for myself, I'd found a sense of empowerment, but now I felt like I was standing on a tightrope. I was terrified of what might happen if I slipped. I decided to have a chat with Lucy, a coworker I had grown close to. She was one of those bright, warm souls who could diffuse tension with just a smile. I pulled her aside during lunch, hoping to share my concerns without coming off as paranoid. "Lucy, have you noticed any changes around here? I can't shake this feeling that things are brewing beneath the surface," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked thoughtful for a moment, chewing her sandwich slowly. "Honestly, I have. Jenna and Mark seem more on edge than usual. It's like they're waiting for something to happen." I took a deep breath. "Do you think they're planning something? I feel like I might be the target." Lucy frowned, her brow furrowing in concern. "I don't know, but you're not alone in this. We're all feeling the pressure from them. Just stay vigilant." That advice echoed in my mind as the days turned into weeks. I tried to be watchful, but it was exhausting. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, analyzing every interaction. Was that a genuine smile from Jenna, or was it a mask hiding something sinister? Then, one fateful Friday, everything changed. It was the end of the week, and I was wrapping up a project. My mind was racing with thoughts of the upcoming weekend when I received an unexpected email notification. It was from our HR department. It read, "Dear team, we will be holding an all-staff meeting on Monday to discuss important changes in our company structure. Your attendance is mandatory." An all-staff meeting? My heart raced. What could this possibly mean? I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna and Mark were somehow involved. As the weekend loomed, I found myself spiraling into a pit of dread. What if this was the moment they'd been waiting for? That Sunday, I barely slept. My mind was an endless loop of worst-case scenarios. By the time Monday rolled around, I felt like a ghost of my former self. I arrived at the office, my heart pounding in my chest. The meeting room was filled with a tense energy, and as I took my seat, I scanned the faces around me. Everyone looked just as anxious. As the meeting began, the HR representative spoke in a calm but serious tone. "Thank you all for gathering. We have some significant changes to announce regarding management structure." My heart sank. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to Jenna and Mark. "Due to recent feedback and a desire to improve our work culture," she continued, "we have decided to make some leadership changes." My palms began to sweat. I glanced over at Jenna, who was seated 2 rows ahead. Her jaw was clenched, and I could see the tension radiating off her. My stomach twisted. Was this her doing? The HR representative went on, "Effective immediately, Jenna will be stepping down from her position as team lead. We are confident that these changes will support a healthier environment moving forward." A wave of mixed emotions crashed over me. I felt a strange sense of vindication, but it was quickly overshadowed by the realization that this wasn't just about Jenna. It was about everyone. As the meeting wrapped up, I caught a glimpse of Jenna's face. Shocked, furious, but there was something else buried deep in her eyes. I couldn't quite place it, but it felt like desperation. Suddenly, the entire office dynamic shifted. I had thought I was battling her, but it turned out we were both struggling against a system that had pitted us against each other. After the meeting, as people filed out, I spotted Lucy. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes wide. "I didn't expect that. I just hope it leads to something good for all of us." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was the beginning of real change, but there was still a part of me that was wary. I had seen how quickly things could spiral out of control. As I made my way back to my desk, I felt the weight of the world lift just a little. But I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jenna and Mark might not be done with their games, and I had to be ready for whatever was next. As I settled into my chair, the familiar hum of the office resumed around me, but it felt different this time. It was as if the air had thickened with unspoken words and hidden agendas. I glanced at my computer screen, the blinking cursor taunting me. I had been trying to draft my resignation letter for weeks, but now it felt like I was at a crossroads. What was I really resigning from? The job I had once loved? Or the toxic environment that had slowly seeped into every aspect of my life? I leaned back, letting the chair cradle my weight as I closed my eyes for a moment. I needed clarity. I needed to know who I could trust. After the meeting, my mind had been racing. I replayed every interaction I had with Jenna, trying to decipher her motivations. Was she truly an enemy? Or was she just another pawn in a game that had been rigged from the start? I thought about the conversations I had overheard, the whispers that danced around the break room, and the way Mark always seemed to be lurking in the background, orchestrating chaos like a conductor leading a symphony of discord. Just then, Lucy popped her head over the cubicle wall. "Hey, do you want to grab coffee?" Her voice was light, but I could sense an undercurrent of concern. "Sure," I replied, grateful for the distraction. We headed to the small cafe down the street, the comforting aroma of roasted coffee beans filling the air. As we waited for our drinks, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension. "What do you think about the meeting?" Lucy asked, her eyes scanning my face for any signs of doubt. "It was intense," I admitted, "but I think it was necessary. It felt like a wake-up call for everyone." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I hope it leads to some real changes. I don't want to see you leave." Her words hit me harder than I expected. The thought of leaving this place behind was liberating, yet terrifying. I had spent years building relationships, investing my time and energy into a role I once cherished. But now, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, one misstep away from a complete fall. We took our coffees back to the office, the warm cups providing a momentary comfort. I returned to my desk, determined to focus, but the nagging feeling of unease lingered. I decided to reach out to some of my colleagues, hoping to gauge their thoughts on the meeting and what it could mean for our future. I started with Sarah, a junior designer who sat a few desks away. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "Of course," she replied, her eyes bright with curiosity. "After the meeting, what did you think? Do you believe things might really change?" She hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I want to believe it, but I'm not so sure. I've seen how things go back to normal after a while. But if we all stand together..." Her words resonated with me. Maybe that was the key. Unity. If we could stand together against the system that had been suppressing us, we might be able to create real change. But how could we do that with the shadows of Jenna and Mark looming over us? As the days passed, I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions. Each morning, I would sit at my desk, staring at the resignation letter I had half written. I wanted to escape, yet something deep inside urged me to stay, to fight back. My colleagues were rallying, sharing their thoughts and frustrations, and for the first time, it felt like we were a team. But there was still the question of Jenna. I needed to figure out her game plan and what role she played in this shifting dynamic. I decided to confront her directly. It was a risky move, but I was done being afraid. The next day, I approached her desk. "Can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. We found a quiet corner in the office, away from prying ears. "I've been thinking about the meeting," I started, watching her expression closely. "I want to know where you stand." She crossed her arms, a defensive posture that made my heart race. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you with us or against us? Because this back and forth isn't helping anyone." For a moment, there was silence. I could see the gears turning in her mind, weighing her options. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders dropping slightly. "I'm just trying to survive, okay? This place is cutthroat. I thought you understood that." "Then let's change it," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We can't keep playing their game. We need to work together." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of vulnerability. And what if they come after us? What if Mark doesn't like it? I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Let them come. We're stronger together, and if we expose their tactics, we can take back control." The tension between us was palpable, but then something shifted. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's see what we can do." As I walked back to my desk, a sense of determination surged through me. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to fight. The battle wasn't just for my job. It was for all of us, and I was no longer alone. With that shared understanding, a weight lifted off my shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I returned to my desk, the chaos of the office around me fading into a dull hum. My mind raced with strategies, and I knew that we had to start gathering evidence. I pulled out my notebook, scribbling down everything I could remember. The whispers, the subtle glances, the way Mark would often manipulate situations to his advantage. It was time to document our experiences, to connect the dots, and create a clear picture of what was really happening. In the days that followed, I formed a clandestine alliance with Sarah. We met during lunch breaks, huddled in the far corner of the cafe, going over notes and sharing our observations. We carefully compiled instances of undermining behavior from Mark and his inner circle. It felt empowering to work together, to share our frustrations and fears. We were no longer isolated, but part of a small movement against the toxicity that had permeated our workplace. One afternoon, as we sat with our coffees, Sarah leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we take this to HR? They need to know what's happening. They can't just ignore it." I paused, the weight of her suggestion hanging in the air. On one hand, it felt like the right course of action, the path toward justice. But on the other hand, I could hear the warning bells ringing in the back of my mind. Would HR truly be an ally? Or would they side with Mark, dismissing our claims? "I don't know, Sarah," I replied, my mind racing. "What if they don't believe us? What if it backfires?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "We can't just keep sitting on this. We need to take action." Her words resonated with me. We had spent too long being silent, and as scary as it was time to stand up for ourselves. "Okay, let's start gathering everything we can," I said, feeling the resolve building inside me. "We'll make a case that they can't ignore." And so we did. We documented every incident, every email that seemed off, and every strange interaction with Mark. We even reached out to a few other colleagues, quietly feeling them out, trying to gauge whether they had experienced similar treatment. To my surprise, several people shared their own stories of intimidation and manipulation, and we found ourselves forming a small group of allies. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me, though. Would this really lead to a positive outcome? What if Mark retaliated? The thought of facing him in a confrontation was terrifying, but I knew I couldn't let fear dictate my actions any longer. I had to be brave for myself and for the others who felt trapped. Finally, after weeks of preparation, we decided it was time to take our findings to HR. The day of the meeting loomed over me like a dark cloud. I spent the morning pacing the office, my stomach churning. I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety, a cocktail of emotions that left me feeling jittery. When the time finally arrived, I gathered with Sarah and a couple of other colleagues in the HR conference room. The air was thick with tension as we took our seats across from the HR manager, a woman named Linda, who had a reputation for being fair but strict. "Thank you all for coming in today," she began, her voice steady and professional. "I understand that you have some concerns you'd like to discuss." Taking a deep breath, I launched into our presentation. With Sarah by my side, we laid out the evidence we had compiled, detailing the instances of harassment and manipulation from Mark. I could see Linda's eyes widen as we spoke, her expression shifting from neutral to concerned. We showed her the emails, shared the stories of our coworkers, and explained how Mark's behavior had created a toxic work environment. I poured my heart into the narrative, sharing not just the facts, but also the emotional toll it had taken on all of us. I could feel the weight of our collective experiences hanging in the air, and I hoped Linda would take them seriously. After we finished, there was a moment of silence in the room. Linda leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her face as she considered our claims. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," she said finally. "I will need to conduct an investigation, but please know that I take these matters very seriously." I could hardly breathe. Part of me wanted to scream with relief, while another part of me felt an overwhelming sense of dread. What if this only made things worse? What if Mark found out we had gone over his head? But there was also a glimmer of hope. For the first time, it felt like we were being heard, like our voices mattered. As we left the meeting, I exchanged a look with Sarah, and we both smiled. Maybe we could change this toxic culture after all. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Would Mark retaliate? Would he find out about our meeting? I found myself on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. But I also felt something else, a sense of empowerment. I had stood up for myself and my colleagues, and I was ready to face whatever came next. I focused on my work, trying to block out the chaos surrounding me. But every time I saw Mark in the halls, a knot would form in my stomach. I knew he was dangerous, and I had to be careful, but I was no longer alone in this fight. I had allies, and together we were stronger. As the investigation progressed, I began to notice subtle changes. Some of my coworkers who had previously been silent started to speak up more in meetings, sharing their ideas and opinions without fear. It felt like a ripple effect, a shift in the office culture that was slowly taking shape. But just when I thought we might be turning a corner, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, I received an email from Linda, asking me to come in for a follow-up meeting. My heart raced at the thought of what she might say. Had they found anything? Did Mark know? I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the journey I had undertaken. I was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant confronting the darkness head-on. As I walked into Linda's office, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The walls seemed to close in, a stark reminder of the tension that had filled the air since the investigation began. Linda was sitting at her desk, her expression serious but not unfriendly. She gestured for me to take a seat, and I did, trying to mask the swirling anxiety in my stomach. "Thank you for coming in. I know things have been tense lately," she started, her voice steady. "I wanted to give you an update on the investigation and discuss some concerns that have come to light." I nodded, my heart pounding. "What have you found?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Linda took a moment, her eyes darting to the papers spread out in front of her. "We've been reviewing the data you provided, as well as some of the feedback we received from your colleagues. It appears that there are patterns of behavior that point to something more systemic than we initially realized." I held my breath, bracing myself. "What do you mean by systemic?" She leaned forward, her hands clasped together. "There are signs that indicate this isn't just about individual actions. It's about a culture that has allowed certain behaviors to persist. We've identified several employees, including Mark, who seem to have been involved in creating an environment of fear and mistrust." I felt a rush of emotion, relief, anger, and determination all mixed together. This was bigger than I had imagined. "So, it wasn't just me?" "Exactly," Linda replied. "It's crucial that you understand this. You're not the only one who has felt the impact of this toxic culture. Many of your colleagues have shared similar experiences, and it's time we address them. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a flicker of hope. What does that mean for us? For me? Linda's expression softened. It means we're taking this seriously. We're going to implement changes, starting with management training and open forums for employees to share their experiences. But we need your help. You've already taken a stand, and your voice is vital in this process. I felt a surge of empowerment. I'm ready to help. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. She smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. That's the spirit. But we also need to be cautious. Mark is not going to take this lying down, and there's a lot at stake. We'll need to document everything carefully and ensure that any actions we take are well thought out. I nodded, the reality of the situation settling in. What if he retaliates? That's a possibility, she admitted. We'll have to be vigilant, but we'll also have your back. You're not alone in this. As the meeting came to a close, I felt a sense of purpose igniting within me. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had suffered in silence. But the weight of that responsibility also made me acutely aware of the risks involved. I left Linda's office feeling a mix of resolve and apprehension, knowing I was stepping into uncharted territory. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the office began to shift. More employees started to speak up during meetings, sharing their ideas and concerns. I watched as a subtle transformation took place. People began to support one another, and a sense of solidarity emerged. It was exhilarating, but I also knew that the storm wasn't over yet. Mark was still lurking in the shadows, and I could sense his discontent growing. I noticed him speaking with a few employees who had been quieter, and it made me uneasy. Was he trying to rally them against me? I couldn't shake the feeling that he was plotting something, and I had to stay on guard. One afternoon, I found myself in the break room, pouring a cup of coffee when I overheard two colleagues talking. I heard Mark is going to meet with upper management soon, one of them whispered. I wonder what he's going to say. My heart raced at the thought. What could he possibly be telling them? I couldn't let him undermine everything we were trying to accomplish. I took a deep breath and decided to confront this head on. I approached them. Hey, I couldn't help but overhear. Do you think Mark is trying to sway management against those of us who have been speaking out? They exchanged worried glances, and one of them finally spoke. It's possible. He's been acting really defensive lately, and I've heard him grumbling about all the changes. What do you think we should do? I asked, my mind racing with possibilities. We need to be unified, the other colleague suggested. If we all stand together, we can counter anything he tries to pull. That resonated with me. We were stronger together, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I decided to organize a meeting after hours, inviting those who had been affected by Mark's behavior. It was time to rally the troops and create a plan. That evening, the small group gathered in a conference room, and I felt a wave of camaraderie wash over me. Everyone was eager to share their stories, their frustrations, and their hopes for a better workplace. As we spoke, I realized that our struggles were intertwined. We were all fighting against the same toxic culture, and it felt empowering to stand together. The more we talked, the more ideas flowed. We discussed strategies for voicing our concerns to management and how we could create a supportive environment moving forward. But amidst the excitement, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was watching us. I felt his presence like a shadow lurking just out of sight. I had to be careful, but I also knew I couldn't back down now. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, no matter how daunting they seemed. I had allies, and we were determined to change the narrative. As the conversation deepened, I felt the weight of unspoken truths being lifted. One by one, my colleagues shared their experiences with Mark, revealing a pattern of manipulation and intimidation that had silenced so many of us for too long. It was cathartic, almost like a group therapy session, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope building among us. We were no longer alone in our struggles. We were a collective voice ready to challenge the status quo. As the meeting progressed, we began to brainstorm practical steps we could take. We decided that our first move would be to document everything. Each of us would keep a detailed account of our encounters with Mark, including dates, times, and specific instances of his behavior. We would compile these accounts into a report to present to HR. It was a daunting task, but it felt empowering to have a plan. I could see the determination in my colleagues' eyes. We were no longer victims. We were warriors ready to fight for our dignity. After the meeting, I felt invigorated. I went home and couldn't shake the feeling of connection and purpose. That night, I drafted an email to our group, summarizing our discussion and outlining our plan for the coming weeks. I knew I had to keep the momentum going. If we wanted to change the culture in our workplace, we needed to be united and resolute. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. We met regularly, fine-tuning our report and gathering more testimonies from others in the office. We even created a secure channel for those who were too afraid to speak up publicly. It was an incredible feeling to watch my colleagues gain confidence as they shared their stories, and it fueled my own resolve. With each passing day, I felt the tide turning. But just as things were looking up, I noticed something unsettling. Mark seemed to be on high alert. His behavior shifted. He became more aggressive, less subtle. It was as if he sensed that we were onto him, and he was desperate to regain control. I felt the paranoia creeping in as I worried that he would retaliate against me or anyone else who dared to stand up to him. I had seen how he could twist narratives and manipulate situations to his advantage. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I had come too far. On one particularly tense afternoon, I walked into the break room and overheard Mark speaking with his ally, Sarah. I pretended to busy myself with the coffee machine, but I was drawn in by their hushed tones. "I can't believe they're actually trying to come together against us," Mark said, his voice laced with disdain. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." A chill ran down my spine, and I felt my heart race. It was clear that Mark was not just a bully. He was a master manipulator who thrived on fear. Suddenly it all clicked. The sabotage, the whispers behind closed doors, the way he had turned coworkers against each other. I had initially thought it was just him, but now I realized that his influence extended beyond me. I had unwittingly stumbled into a much larger game, and it was time to confront it head-on. I shared what I had overheard with the group during our next meeting. There was a mix of concern and anger, and I could see the fire in their eyes. We knew we had to be strategic in our approach. We decided that it was time to take our findings to HR, and we were going to do it together. Our report was solid, and we were ready to make our voices heard. The day we presented our case to HR was nerve-wracking. I could feel the tension in the air as we filed into the conference room. We had rehearsed what we would say, each of us assigned a different point to address. I could see the unease on some of my colleagues' faces, but I also saw the determination shining through. We were here to stand up for ourselves and for each other. As I began to speak, I felt the weight of our shared experiences behind me. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of my colleagues, and I felt a surge of confidence. I recounted the incidents we had documented, emphasizing how Mark's behavior had created a toxic atmosphere in the workplace. The HR representatives listened intently, and for the first time, I felt like we were being taken seriously. After our presentation, there was a moment of silence. I held my breath, waiting for their response. Finally, one of the HR reps spoke up. "We appreciate you bringing this to our attention. We take these matters very seriously and will investigate immediately." Relief washed over me, but I knew we were still in the early stages of a long battle. We had taken the first step, but the fight was far from over. In the days that followed, I kept my eyes peeled for any signs of retaliation from Mark. I braced myself for the worst, but instead, I noticed something surprising. A few of my colleagues who had previously stayed silent began to speak out. They shared their own stories of harassment and intimidation, emboldened by our collective efforts. It was like a ripple effect, each voice strengthening the next, and I felt a swell of pride for the community we had built. But then, out of nowhere, I received an email that would change everything. It was from someone I never expected, a former employee who had left the company under suspicious circumstances. She reached out to me, revealing that she had been one of Mark's early victims. As I read her words, a wave of realization hit me. The sabotage I had faced wasn't just personal. It was part of a larger pattern. I needed to dig deeper and find out the full extent of Mark's manipulation before it was too late. I remember the moment I read that email vividly. It felt like the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was trying to solve were suddenly laid out before me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something monumental. something that extended far beyond my own experience. The former employee, Jessica, detailed her own encounters with Mark, the threats, and the psychological games he played that had led her to leave the company in fear. It was a chilling account, but it also served as a catalyst for me. I knew I had to gather more evidence, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been affected by his toxic presence. Over the next few weeks, I dove into research mode. I reached out to former employees, those who had left long before I arrived, and I dug through archives and reports. Every conversation revealed more layers of manipulation, more stories of fear that echoed my own. It was staggering to think that this man had built his career on the backs of so many silenced voices, and I was determined to shine a light on it. One day I received a message from a colleague who had been particularly quiet during the initial uproar. Her name was Emma, and she had been watching from the sidelines, hesitant to step into the fray. But after hearing my story and the stories of others, she finally found her voice. We set up a meeting, and as we spoke, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Emma was brilliant and had a wealth of knowledge about the inner workings of our department. Together, we plotted our next steps, rallying support and preparing for what we knew would be a daunting confrontation. It wasn't long before we organized a formal meeting with HR. Emma and I stood side by side, armed with evidence and a resolve that felt unbreakable. The day of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves, but Emma squeezed my hand, reminding me of everything we had fought for. When we entered that room, I felt like we were on the front lines of a war, ready to declare that enough was enough. As we presented our findings, the faces of the HR representatives shifted from skepticism to shock. The atmosphere in the room transformed as we shared the stories of the women who had been silenced, including our own. Each testimony was a thread in a larger tapestry of abuse that Mark had woven over the years. I could see their realization dawn on them, the gravity of the situation settling in like a heavy fog. After the meeting, we were left with a glimmer of hope, but also an uncertainty about the outcome. Would they take our claims seriously? Would this be another futile effort to sweep the issue under the rug? Time seemed to stretch as we awaited their response. Days turned into weeks, but we didn't back down. We continued to gather testimonies and support from our colleagues, creating a coalition of voices that could no longer be ignored. Finally, we received a call from HR. They had conducted their investigation and concluded that Mark's behavior warranted disciplinary action. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. While it was a victory, it was also just the beginning. The battle against workplace harassment was far from over, and I knew that there would be pushback, perhaps even retaliation. But standing there with Emma, I realized we had sparked something bigger than ourselves. We decided to take it a step further. It was clear that we needed to enact real policy changes within our organization, not just for us, but for future employees. We presented a proposal for mandatory training on harassment and a clear reporting structure that encouraged transparency. To our surprise, the leadership team responded positively, and they were willing to implement changes. It felt surreal, like we were actually making a difference. As the weeks passed, I began to see a shift in the culture around the office. More people were speaking up, sharing their experiences, and supporting one another. It was a sight to behold, watching my colleagues reclaim their power and advocate for a safer work environment. I felt a sense of camaraderie that I hadn't experienced before, and it filled me with hope for the future. But then, Mark tried to make his move. He attempted to intimidate us, sending messages that hinted at our jobs being at stake. He wanted us to back down, to silence us once again. I remember standing in my office, staring at my computer screen, my heart racing. I thought about everything we had fought for, the voices that had been silenced before us, and the strength we had built together. I knew I couldn't let him win. With Emma by my side, we reported his actions to HR, documenting every interaction. The support we had built over those months came rushing back to me, every person who had lent their voice to our cause. It was overwhelming to see how far we had come, how many lives we had touched, and how many people were ready to stand with us. In the end, Mark was placed on leave pending further investigation, and that was a victory worth celebrating. But it was more than just a personal win. It was a step towards creating an environment where people felt safe to speak out, where harassment had no place. I realized that the journey was not just about confronting one man, but about changing a culture. As I reflect on everything that's happened, I can't help but think about the power of community. We are stronger together, and when we lift each other up, we can weather even the toughest storms. So now I ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? How would you have handled a situation like this? Let me know below. This experience has taught me so much about resilience and the importance of standing up for what is right. It's also reminded me that we all have a voice, and it's our responsibility to use it. I hope my story inspires others to find their strength, to speak out against injustice, and to know that they are never alone in their fight. Together, we can create change, and together we can build a world where everyone feels safe, valued, and heard. Thank you for being a part of my journey, and I look forward to hearing your stories too.